Welcome back to iGen Politics. This podcast makes politics engaging and relevant for all generations. This is Victor Shi.
And I'm Jill Wine-Banks, and today's hashtag Jill's Pin is a microphone because the subject we're discussing has to do with being able to communicate and whether it's fair and free, and you'll see what we're talking about.
Last week, CNN hosted Donald Trump for what was billed as a town hall, while moderator Caitlin Collins tried her best to rein Trump in and fact-check Trump in real time. It was not nearly enough. The format and the hand-selected audience of Republicans and right-leaning independents made it impossible. The audience was totally sympathetic to him. They clapped for him. They cheered him on. They laughed at his lies and insults, including calling Caitlin a nasty woman. They enabled the worst of Donald Trump, and democracy lost because of it. So today we're going to talk about what led up to this moment and how the media and media organizations should be covering Donald Trump and other over-the-top right-wing extremists heading into 2024.
We have a wonderful guest today, Mark Jacob. I read an opinion piece of his in the Courier, and I thought it brilliantly analyzed some of these issues. And he's joining us today to discuss all of this. His Twitter description says everything you need to know about him. I'm going to read it to you. It says he is an ex-editor at the Chicago Tribune and the Sun-Times, and notes that he is now allowed to have opinions. And boy, does he have opinions. He's also co-authored 8 books on history and photography. And he ends his Twitter description saying he's intolerant of racism and small-mindedness. So I think he's going to be a great guest. He's now with M. Harris and Company, which is a marketing and consulting firm that makes its clients look memorable. I'm happy to report that I know a number of his colleagues, and it's the first time I'm meeting Mark today and learning a lot about him, including that he's my neighbor and may know my cousin who used to work at the Tribune at the same time he did. But anyway, he regularly speaks out about the role of the press in our current democracy, which is, I think, at stake. And we're glad to have him with us. Thank you, Mark, for being with us today.
Well, thanks for asking me.
So we don't want to talk about what Trump said during the town hall because I'm sure our audience has seen clips online, if not the entire show. And because we refuse to traffic in lies, instead, we want to analyze kind of how this event happened, even in the first place. And I'm wondering kind of what you think went into CNN's decision to even platform Donald Trump.
I feel like it was not a journalism decision. I feel like it was very clearly kind of a marketing decision or a decision for CNN to become. They wanted to be a player in the election campaign. They wanted to be more important, and they thought bringing this kind of career-long liar on CNN would get a lot of attention and make them kind of more relevant. I mean, they didn't want to cover it. They wanted to be part of it. And that's part of the whole problem. Because if they wanted to cover it, they would have done a lot of different things that would have minimized Trump's ability to just lie over and over again.
We'll talk about some of those things.
Well, Jill, I have my idea, and this is one of the few ways that you could actually have Trump on TV and it go well. Or at least go well for the viewers, go well for the people, for the public. Wouldn't go that well for Donald Trump. And that's when you have him on. If you're going to have him on live, which frankly that's not that great an idea anyway, because it's so hard to fact check in real time.
Yeah.
But if you're going to have him on, have a panel of experts who know all the issues, and they would have what I call a truth buzzer. And so whenever Donald Trump said something that was just wrong or seemed wrong, they'd hit the truth buzzer, and the host, in this case Caitlin Collins, would say, "Excuse me, Mr. Trump, hold on, we have to check with our panel on that last statement you made." They'd go over to the panel would say, this and the other, no, this is not accurate, and then they'd move on to the next to let Trump talk again, and then the next time he lied, they'd hit the truth buzzer again, and they would go through it that way, and he would not be allowed to talk until his issue was adjudicated. And this way, you wouldn't have this kind of what they call the fire hose of falsehood, where people like Trump and Kellyanne Conway is like this too. They talk so fast. There's no there's no space between their sentences to where they talk and talk and talk, kind of like what I'm doing right now, where you can't get a word in edgewise, and you keep on talking, and I see you say lies, and you seem rude if you interrupt people like that. And so, go ahead. Please.
No, go finish. And sorry,
no,
I thought you were done.
I just feel like that you put someone like Caitlin Collins in a terrible position when you do that, because she has to either interrupt him and look rude, or she has to let him lie. And the problem also is that if you do interrupt him, you never can get back to the first lie. It's a series of lies, and so you might fact check lie number 3 or 4 or 5, but you're never going to get up to lie number 1. I mean, it's just so hard to backtrack in that context.
So it was an impossible situation for Caitlin. There was no question. But what you said brings me to sort of a question, twofold. One, would Donald Trump ever agree to appear in such a format? And there are already rumors that negotiations about this particular format took place between CNN and the Trump team. And it's known that Caitlin came from a right-wing Daily Caller and had very limited experience. No matter how talented you are, there's no substitute for having experience. She's only a few years into the business, so to speak, and started as an entertainment reporter and then briefly as a White House reporter. So do you think it's true that these negotiations took place between Trump and CNN, and that he would, and then go back to the other question, would he ever accept a proposal that included the kinds of things you've said?
No way. There's no way he would, or he'd stomp off in the first 30 seconds. But one thing about that, and I don't normally, since CNN turned into this kind of both sidesism kind of network, I don't watch them anymore. I did watch this just because I was going to write about it, and it seems like right at the start of the show, Collins said there were no conditions given for his appearance. And I frankly don't believe that. How could that be true? They had to negotiate over who would be in the audience. They had to negotiate whether who would be on stage. They had to negotiate on all those things. They had to negotiate on the length of it. So this thing, there were no conditions. I don't know what they're talking about. That doesn't make any sense at all. They clearly negotiated the conditions for how he would appear. But the thing about, well, she's inexperienced, so she wasn't up to it. She's actually a pretty good reporter, I think, generally. But it's impossible for one person to handle that. I just think that, because he's talking so fast and he's saying so many lies. Also, you should come armed with facts. There's no reason. What I didn't understand is, why did CNN not have videos and not have Truth Social posts ready to pop on the screen as soon as he said something? When he denied something, why weren't they equipped to say, well, hold on a second, Mr. Trump, you put this on a Truth Social post 2 months ago, or let's watch this, let's listen to this audio of you trying to talk the Georgia election official into finding 12,000 votes or whatever. That's so why. So there's no excuse for not being prepared. This was not. Trump didn't say anything that was new, really. I mean, or hardly anything that was new. Most of that stuff we knew already. So they knew about it. And so why weren't they not prepared to just go to just push back on every lie he made? Why did they let him steamroll them?
You raise an important point, which is that we had Mehdi Hassan on a few weeks ago about his new book, which was How to Win Arguments and How to Present. And one of the things he says is you always have to have the receipts. Mm-hmm. And they clearly did not. Victor, you want to take the next one?
But Donald Trump even at one point had the receipts. I mean, he pulled out this paper with all of his tweets, and it was kind of a laughable moment. But I mean, Caitlin Collins, I mean, there could have been such easy moments where Caitlin Collins, for example, they were talking about the Georgia phone call, and she said, well, we've listened to the audio. Well, they could have played that audio easily at that point. They didn't. And I'm wondering, I mean, why do you first, is there anyone who you can think of who can push back against Trump in real time in this live format? Also, in general, kind of why do you think politicians in the media are afraid of or bowing to Donald Trump?
Well, as far as who could, match up with him, Mehdi is a good example of somebody who could match up with him. Jon Stewart also, somebody who has there's gravitas and experience, and really isn't afraid of having the interviewee walk out on him. Just is not worried about that. And that's the problem here, is that CNN had Trump on for programming. They wanted, it was a product to them. And they were cooperating with Trump on producing the product, and the product was valuable to them. It was an access issue. And the real problem with the way people do interviews these days on TV, especially, is they care about access too much. If they think if they're too rude, rude is, I'm using rude the way, I don't really mean rude. I think asking a hard question is not rude. It's just direct. It's just professional. But it comes across sometimes as rude. If you interrupt somebody, or you tell them that they're not answering your question, or you ask the same question 3 or 4 times. But you got to do that. The thing that bothers me about and Caitlin Collins was really guilty of this, is you ask the question, he doesn't answer it. You ask the question again, he doesn't answer it, and you move on. That's not what you do. You keep on asking the question until he answers it, or if he doesn't answer it after the 3rd or 4th time, you announce to the audience, he's not going to answer my question, so we will move on. You don't let them skate. And Trump was allowed to skate on a bunch of stuff in that thing.
So Victor and I had a very exciting situation where the guest almost walked off. It was Chris Miller, who was the Secretary of Defense during January 6th. And virtually at maybe the second question, maybe it was the first, he literally was it the first? Yeah, he was about to get up and walk off. I talked him off the ledge, and he stayed, and it became a very, very important interview. But we were willing, well, first of all, we didn't think the first question was going to set him off. I have to admit that. But if he had, then that would have said a lot. And so I don't think it's always so bad. But anyway, we've seen this not just with Trump, though. 60 Minutes at CBS had a similar calculation, it seems, by platforming Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Right.
So what do you think that was the same thing? Talk about that a little.
Yeah, it was the same thing and CBS is in a bad place right now. I mean, they had Mick Mulvaney. They're paying Mick Mulvaney to be a commentator. I mean, so you're paying somebody who's really part of the problem and part of the threat to democracy, and has been proven to be that. So, again, it's just wanting to be a player. It's wanting to be part of the system. And the best journalism is outside the system. It's overseeing the system. It's watchdogging the system. It's not being part of it. That's why, I mean, just to go off on a little mini rant here, that's why, to me, the correspondence dinner in Washington drives me up the wall, because it's journalists and politicians hobnobbing and partying together as if they're part of the same club. They better not be part of the same club, or it's a bad club. This is not what journalists are not supposed to be friends of politicians. They're supposed to watchdog and report on politicians. They shouldn't be their friends. If they're their friends, they shouldn't be reporting on them.
So I think that's something we could discuss at much greater length. But let's look at continuing this discussion about why outlets do this, why media does this. And part of it is because they are a business. They have to make money. And so, we can't ignore that they need advertisers, they need viewers. And so they may be doing this at the end of the day to make money and to get ratings and viewers. But so the question really is then for you, Mark, what's the point at which the business model is a disservice to democracy, is a disservice to the voters who need what you're saying? They need the facts in order to make valid decisions at the polling place.
Well, it's there's that old saying in Soviet Russia where, when it comes time to hang the capitalists, they will, dicker over the price to sell us the rope. And I think of that when I think of this kind of really chummy journalism that lets fascists on to say really horrible things. I mean, the journalists who are doing that, do they think that they would survive in a fascist system? And I use the word fascist not for alarm or anything. I use it because it's accurate, because that's what's going on right now. I am extremely alarmed by what's going on. And the fact that the news media still wants to act, many of them at least still want to act like this is going to be a normal election next year, or like it's just two candidates. It's just, it's just the two political parties. They're right about the same, and I'm old enough to remember when I thought the political parties were about the same. And I think that they kind of were in the 70s and 80s. And, I went back and looked at some of the scandals in the 80s and 90s. And, they were pretty much bipartisan scandals, Keating 5 and various things like that. And ab scam, things like that. And there were plenty of Democrats involved in that. I kind of feel like Bill Clinton, he had his own scandals, but beyond Clinton, when you got beyond Clinton and you got to like Obama, I think Obama kind of cleaned things up. When you look at the history of his administration, there are very few scandals. And yet you have the Republican Party at the same time. You've got Newt Gingrich and various other, dirty dealers. What I'm saying is that treating the two parties as the same is a giant mistake now, because in the last 30 years, things have really gone off the rails for the Republican Party, and to fail to realize that is a mistake. It's the news media in fantasy land, because they want things to be just the same way they always were, so they can go to the same cocktail parties. And I've got to emphasize, Victor and Jill, that the access is a huge issue. And the idea that these big networks want to be part of the whole system, and so they want to get the guests, and they want to promote it. Now, the thing about CNN that you were talking about it being a business decision for them, I don't see their lane, and I'd be curious what you guys think about this. I do not understand what their lane is. At one point in time, you had MSNBC sort of on the left, although not all the time, but sort of on the left. You had Fox clearly on the right. You had those really right-wing outliers, Newsmax and
OAN.
One American, OAN. And you had CNN kind of sitting there in the middle, which was not that bad a place to be from a marketing perspective or from a programming perspective. And I don't understand why they didn't like it. I mean, I have to think that it's John Malone, the guy who owns CNN, who gave money to Trump's inauguration. And I have to think that I don't think it's a business decision is what I'm saying. I think that CNN has now gotten a position where they don't have a lane. I'm trying to understand what their lane is. And you look at their ratings, they're not good at all. They're not getting better either. And so
on Friday there was a new oh, is that me, or is I hear an echo?
You.
So it might be okay. Well, on Friday, I mean, I saw this new. I guess they released their the audience for Friday, and CNN was trailing Newsmax. And it was under 300,000 viewers. I mean, it just was kind of abysmal numbers. And as you're saying this, I mean, you're reminding me of kind of this call that I saw. It was after the morning after the town hall, and Chris Licht did this conference call with a bunch of CNN employees, and basically said that Caitlin did such a great job at like making news, which to me, based off of what you are saying, is exactly the problem, in that it's not up to cable news companies to make news. It's up to cable news companies to report news. And I'm wondering if you kind of agree with that, and then also more generally, what the proper role of the media now is in this kind of moment in our democracy.
Well, I have to say that, as much as I criticize Chris Licht, and I think he's just a pox on CNN and has ruined it, and I hope he gets fired. I think that, again, he took a little too much, of a hit for that, because I mean, as a former editor, when I sent a reporter out to an interview and they came back and said, wow, he said this or she said that, I would say, wow, you broke some news there. There's some news in this interview. And that didn't mean that I thought the Chicago Tribune would become the news. It said that we were getting beyond what was already known. That we were contributing to the information that the public had. And so making news in that way is not a bad thing. But I think what people have gotten onto, and I kind of agree with this impulse, is that they think that it means that he's become the news. That he wants CNN to become the news. And you guys haven't asked about Anderson Cooper yet. Are you going to ask about that?
Sure.
Yes.
And we might as well right now, since you
Yeah.
raised it. I'm sure you remember some of the things he said in trying to defend. Let me see. I did write down. He said, and you were quoted as saying that it was a ridiculous false choice presented by Anderson Cooper, as if platforming a torrent of fascist lies pushes forward a responsible conversation about this nation's future. So,
Right. That's
you
what
want
he
to
was
expand
saying.
on that?
Well, all right. So the next morning, everyone is just, dumping on CNN, rightly so, for this abomination. One of the worst things I've seen in TV news in years. I mean, just terrible, because it just allowed somebody to make vicious lies. I mean, about crazy stuff, like about babies being murdered by Democrats after they're born, and also defame the woman that he had just been found in court to have defamed. I mean, come on, it was an abomination. All right, so this is terrible. Everyone says it's terrible, and Anderson Cooper, trying to defend the brand, the next day says, I know, some of you will never watch us again. I know you're mad at us, but this guy is like the leading Republican candidate for president, and we can't ignore him. We ignore him at our peril. You can't stay in your silo. And it was the silos thing that drove everyone nuts, I think, including me. It was like any of us have been in our silos. What are we talking about? Are the three of us talking about how we don't know what the Republicans are doing right now and we don't care? We're not talking about that. A rational discussion about what's going on today. Everyone with a brain wants that.
Right.
Everyone who cares about the democracy wants that. And so that's not what the choice was. It wasn't a choice between completely ignoring politics or watching Donald Trump lie for 70 minutes. Those are not the two choices that were in front of us. And so it was just intellectually dishonest by Anderson Cooper, who I used to like when I watched CNN. I mean, as a former journalist, I don't like to denounce news organizations. I think news organizations are super important. I don't know how you can't have democracy without having news and without having facts that people can agree on. That's the whole problem today, is that the Republicans want there be no facts that we agree on, and therefore we can't have democracy. So the news media is just super important in all this. And I don't want CNN to be terrible. I don't want it to fail. I want it to be really good. I want it to be fair. And but it's not. And we have to say that. And it's but back to really what your question you asked, Jill, was what's the role? What's their role? And I've kind of stopped believing in objectivity. I mean, when I was an editor at the Chicago Tribune, on the national desk, I would read the Washington stories when they came in, and I would actually count in those stories how many quotes from Republicans and quotes from Democrats we had. The idea that would make us fair if they were close.
Fair, yeah.
And I remember several stories about Bush's explanation for why he invaded, Iraq, and bumping up his explanation so it wasn't so low in the story, just because I thought that was fair. So I have a long history, as a newspaper person, of trying to balance stories out and make them fair. And that's back when I believed in newspaper and news objectivity. I don't really anymore, because when you think about it, everyone's got an opinion, including news people. And you have some beat reporter who's covered the same topic for 20 years. Do you really want that reporter to pretend they don't know anything? That they don't bring any knowledge to the subject? That they haven't reached any conclusions about something they've been covering for 20 years? No, and they have conclusions. The thing is, it's performative. They're pretending that well, this person just said something, and we don't know if it's true or not. They do know. And I feel like, and also the very act of assigning a news story. I was an editor, and I would send reporters out to cover stories. I didn't send a reporter out and say, you have to cover every story that's out there in Chicago today. No, I picked a story and I sent them to cover it. That was a value judgment on my part. That was me deciding, this is important to our readers, that's not, or not as important. That's a value judgment. That's my opinion. That's not objective. That's a subjective judgment on my part. And so if you're making subjective judgments based on your goal of getting the readers the best story or the thing that most affects their lives and is important to you, that's perfectly noble. And so I really like what you're getting. Some people, Jay Rosen at NYU is good about this too, about how that journalists stating their biases or stating their, I mean, even a journalist saying, I believe in a woman's right to an abortion. I mean, just saying that it's honest. That's where we're coming from. And that's much better than just pretending you don't have any opinions on anything, and that, well, they said that and then they said that, and who knows? I mean, people don't go to news sources to hear who knows. They go to news sources to find expert people who've been studying a subject for years explain what they believe is going on based on the facts in front of them.
Right.
And
But you got to stop at the word facts, because
yeah,
that's where the real
Yeah.
problem is. And I, like you, remember when facts mattered, when there were only 3 networks, NBC, ABC, CBS, and they all had the same facts. They might have people on who had different opinions about what to do with those facts, but they didn't debate the truth of information. We now live in an alternative universe where we do not agree on facts, and you have Donald Trump repetitively repeating the same lies that have been debunked and proved to be false. And so I do think the media role has to be to call him or any other person, Democrat or Republican, who repeats something that's inaccurate, either by accident, by lack of information, or by deliberate choice. And actually, when we talk about deliberate choice, CNN made a deliberate choice in formatting this in the way it did and in not pushing back. CBS did the same thing with Marjorie Taylor Greene. They made a choice. They could have pushed back, but they didn't. And so I like your ideas about how to do that, even though you've said, well, yeah, that's true, but Donald Trump wouldn't appear in that format. So then where do you go? Because I used to argue to juries, no matter how thin the pancake, it has 2 sides. And I don't believe that so much anymore, because what that's led to is this whole concept of alternative facts. They aren't.
Yeah.
Those are lies.
But
There is only one truth. You can package those facts in ways that could persuade you of an opinion or a policy in one
Right.
direction or a policy in a different direction, but they would only be one set of facts. And so that's where we're stuck, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I'm not like arguing for, well, all we need is, leftist propaganda in our news. I'm not arguing that at all. I feel like, I feel like there are a lot of legitimate opinions on the right. I mean, I think it's a perfectly legitimate opinion if someone wants to think that the government shouldn't fund healthcare,
Right.
or if somebody thinks that abortion is murder. That's their opinion. I respect it. Fine. But saying that the 2020 election was stolen is just a flat lie. That's
Yes.
just a lie, and they know it's a lie. It's an attempt to persuade ignorant people to follow a demagogue, and
Right.
that's what the news media need to say. And
Right.
because that's a fact too. The fact is that Donald Trump is lying about the 2020 election in order to raise money that he's not spending, to fight the election results, which he lied about. He probably committed a crime with that.
Yes.
And he's doing it to get money and to keep followers. That's a fact. That's an objective fact as you're going to get. And I think the news media need to state it. Also, another thing I want to say about media objectivity is that I think that the news media they've been intimidated away from putting things in context. For example, all right, they say, E. Jean Carroll accused Trump of sexual assault. Trump denies it. Or what drives me crazy is when they say, well, Trump vehemently denies it, as if vehemently needs to be in that sentence. Just say they denied it. It's like just because they acted, put out about it doesn't mean it's a better denial than if they just denied it. So but just saying he denied it. But they never say, and they would be accused of bias if they did say, Donald Trump, who was caught on tape bragging about sexual assault, has denied assaulting E. Jean Carroll. That's a fact. That's an objective fact. It's also a fact with a valuable context that this person who's denying sexually assaulting somebody was caught on tape bragging about sexually assaulting strangers, women he had just met, grabbing them in their private parts. He was caught on tape saying that. And also, I mean, just whenever you're like going to have a denial by Trump, they just say he denied it as if that's a legitimate denial, as if that's just a regular person saying they didn't do something. This is a guy who was caught lying more than 30,000 times when he was a president. And say that. They would never say that in a news story because that would come across as biased. It's not biased. It's valuable context that helps you assess whether somebody is telling the truth or not. But they would never do it. So that's what I'm saying. So I think that what I'm saying is I think that the news media are intimidated into kind of a false pretense of objectivity in which they pretend things are true that they know are lies.
Well, what you're saying certainly was a persuasive piece of evidence in the trial where it was put in context of one woman saying he did this to me, and then two other women saying he did it to me too, and then him saying this is what I do to women. Right. So reporting on that, you would have to include all of those things in the context, at least of the trial. But you raised another issue, which is about sort of bowing to Donald Trump. And why are politicians and the media so afraid of him?
He's really, I mean, the thing is, he doesn't know anything about policy. He doesn't like to read. He's, famously anti-intellectual and not into stuff like that. But at the same time, there's certain things that are brilliant about Donald Trump. He is brilliant about, he's a great liar. He's the most talented liar in American history. I mean, he's just energetic. He would rather lie than tell the truth. It's the most natural act, for him. And so he's good at that. He's really good at that. And he's good at like pushing back, and he's good at making up specific lies too. A lot of people will just lie in general ways. He just, he invents it. Well, they were stuffing the ballot box, in Georgia. They were like, they were pulling stuff out from under the table. They were, there's always some narrative to his lies. There's always some kind of, so he's just very good at that. And he's also the thing that was the most alarming thing to me about the threat to democracy was Donald Trump can smell weakness in people. And in 2016, he saw that whole Republican field, and he knew that he could intimidate the hell out of them. Mm-hmm. He knew that they were not, that none of them had the courage of their convictions. None of them were able to stand up to a bully. And they folded like a tent. They all just, Donald Trump saying mean things about us. And so as far as why do people still follow Trump, and why does the news media get intimidated by Trump? Trump is really good at intimidation, and he's good at picking on people who are weak and picking at people's sore points and getting really personal about stuff to where, none of us, no matter how much we want to talk about policy, if somebody's going to like make fun of how long our hair is or that we wear funny clothes, like Donald Trump would if he wanted to, they're vulnerable. Their people are personally vulnerable to that. So calling Marco Rubio Little Marco worked. It made him. It scared him, and frankly, Marco Rubio's proved himself to be very little since then. But so I guess the reason that I just think it's wrong to underestimate Trump and what he's about. Not a smart man, but just with great propaganda instincts.
Well, also, I think a lot of people actually believe the same terrible policies that he believes. So they follow him because I hadn't really thought of that, but one of my sisters-in-law from the podcast, my other podcast, made that comment recently, and it really resonated with me. But I think we want to go back to the audience at the CNN town hall, and Victor had a question about the audience.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it ties sort of in, and to me that was the most disturbing part because, like you said, I mean, Trump is so good at lying. He's so good at kind of twisting the facts and attacking people, and the audience supported that, and they were a key component of that town hall, cheering him on. I'm wondering if you can even read into that decision positively, and Shannon's decision to choose that type of audience.
Oh, well, there's also there was that revelation that the producers went to the audience and asked them not to boo. So they
Yes,
didn't ask them
yes.
not to cheer or not to whoop and holler and not to laugh. They asked them not to boo. So they were
Mhm.
helping fix the audience for Trump.
How could they have done that?
Well, they walked out and they did in the prep, the audience prep.
Right,
The
but isn't
producer did,
that
right?
anti-journalistic? I mean, does that meet journalistic standards?
It wasn't journalism, Jill. It was a show.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
was marketing. It was a program that's supposed to help CNN, be a player in the whole election. Um,
yeah.
you don't need an audience. There's really no purpose of the audience other than for drama. I mean, it's truly a part of creating this kind of atmospherics that create
Yeah.
this sense of tension and make it just more dramatic. That's all the reason they did it. You don't need an audience. I don't understand why there's ever an audience for a political debate. It seems like it only messes things up. It only makes it unfair because somebody laughs or
Yeah.
cheers or something to one candidate over another, and some candidates are better at playing to the audience than others. So there's a really good journalism argument for not having an audience at things like this. But if it's showtime and it's not journalism, you'd have an audience.
I mean, looking back at what happened last week, I'm wondering if you can think of any format that would work for Trump. I mean, town halls seem like it's really hard. Would debates work any better, or will anything ever work to kind of control Trump, who, like you said, lies repetitively?
You mean said work for Trump? You don't mean work in Trump's favor. You mean work for how to cover Trump?
Right.
Yes, yes.
Well, I think, I mean, the what I talked about with the truth buzzer and all that. There's yeah, he'd walk out in the first 30 seconds, so that wouldn't work. Um, no, I don't think that. I think there's no format that would be fair to the audience as far as delivering real facts to them that Donald Trump would allow. Donald Trump. That's why it's why he calls into Fox and stuff. He's not calling into to MSNBC because he knows he'd be asked hard questions. I just feel like no, there's no way. And the thing about just to be really clear about this, we know exactly. We don't need to know. Well, I wonder what this Donald Trump guy is. Wonder what his positions are. I wonder what
Yeah.
is he prejudiced against people? Does he foment hatred, or is he a straight shooter? Does he tell the truth? We don't have any of those questions. The most known thing in the entire universe is Donald Trump. I mean, come on. We know who the guy is. So we don't need town halls. I don't know what we need from him other than to protect ourselves from him. And if you're going to have a debate, with other Republicans, which is fine, don't do it with an audience and give everyone equal time. And the thing about with a debate, it's different because I don't feel like in a debate the moderator is under an obligation to correct lies. I feel like that's the job of the rivals. I mean, it should be. They should be able to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
And that is clearly an adversarial situation where it's competitive and all that. The thing that was so bad about the CNN thing is that Caitlin Collins was put into an interrogator position, into a completely adversarial position where it was Trump in the audience versus her, which was just outrageously bad. And I think I tweeted that night that the executives of that news organization really treated her badly. Should have never put her in that position and should be ashamed of themselves. They should be pariahs in the industry for having put a journalist in the position to fail so badly because they didn't give her any of the weapons to succeed.
Yeah. And you've mentioned a lot of good ones that they could have done
Yeah, they
in
could have
terms
done
of
plenty.
preparation. Yeah, they definitely could have. So given what happened at that format and given what happened in the news coverage of the 2016 and 2020 elections, let's zoom out to look at how the media could be covering campaigns. How can they cover candidates who are not traditional candidates who will go out and give a policy speech, who will go out and tell lies, who will repeat those lies even though they've been thrown out of court 60 times, who hire people like the ninjas in Arizona who say there was no fraud. In fact, Biden got more votes than you thought he did. You got less. And that's the people they hired, not people who were, objective.
Yeah, but the thing about that,
what's the way for the media to handle it?
Well, just one thing on the ninjas, and this, because this goes to the Durham thing as well, is that like fascist propagandists like Donald Trump, the accusation's enough. All they want is the accusation. They don't care about what the outcome is later. Nobody pays attention to that, or few people. That's down the road. The accusation or suspicion enough is valuable to them politically. That's why, in the Ukraine thing where Trump was trying to intimidate Ukraine into starting an investigation of Biden, they didn't really care if there was an investigation. It's obvious from the way it turned out that all they wanted was an announcement by Zelensky that he was doing an investigation.
Yeah.
That announcement would have been enough if they didn't do anything else. And that's the same thing in the Durham thing. The fact that they could talk about this for years was plenty good enough.
Yeah.
So it's not. So they don't really. All they need are propaganda points. They don't care about results of investigations.
Yeah,
so what does the media do? So you asked what does media do going forward? Well, and I don't think they're going to do any of it. I've pretty much given up on the idea that the news media is going to save us. I think we have to save ourselves. I think that people have to come together, and the very few kind of progressive outlets that are out there, they have to do their thing and do it strongly. And people like you guys have to speak out. And people have to speak up. They have to volunteer. And I'm not a journalist anymore. So I went up to Wisconsin and knocked on doors for that Supreme Court candidate. I can do that now because I'm not a journalist. And that's a real thing you can do to fight off the rise of fascism in America. And so real people can do that. So but the news media, I mean, if we're waiting around for them to save us, we're going to be sorely disappointed. But what can they do that's better? Well, they could spend less time worrying about polls. They could worry much more about policies. This is the thing. I mean, so many journalists, especially on TV, they're totally bored with policies. They're bored with the issues. They don't care. Price of insulin. Who cares? They'd much rather cover the politicians saying things because there's cameras. They have the easy footage. They don't have to go find some woman with diabetes and Dubuque and interview her. They can just have Ron DeSantis say something chippy in front of TV cameras. So it's much easier for them, and they also don't have to understand the nuances of the issues. Issues are hard. They're complicated. They're not simple, and legislation's hard. So they would much rather cover who's winning, who's losing. Is what's happening with Nancy Pelosi. Well, let me tell you, the regular people, they don't care what's happening with Nancy Pelosi, but they might care whether their uncle has, health care and can get, his sore leg treated. They might care much more about that than whether Nancy Pelosi or Kevin McCarthy were winners or losers in some particular situations. But the news media is different. The news media needs characters. It needs to turn it into a story. And so they're way obsessed with polls and with who's up, who's down, and that stuff. If the news media really wanted to help us, they would explain things. They would be doing much better on this debt ceiling stuff and explaining that the Republicans actually are holding the economy hostage, for political benefit. But it's all personality. So what would be good is if the news media actually explained how government works and what politicians stand for. The news media still hasn't pinned down hardly any of the Republican candidates on where exactly they stand on abortion. Abortion, one of the biggest issues that's going on right now. And they keep on asking the Republicans keep on being evasive. Well, I think we should, Nikki Haley was like, well, we should find consensus. What kind of answer is that? Obviously, we're not going to find consensus. Where do you stand on a national abortion ban or limit or whatever? Where do you stand on this? And the news media needs to relentlessly ask questions of these people and not let them wiggle away. But but they do because, they'd much rather get pictures of them, kissing babies and talking to people in diners.
Well, the media really has a big job ahead of it in a very, very difficult time where facts are not well known and aren't being communicated. And some of the candidates are being allowed to, as we've talked about Trump, repetitively repeat, I guess that's to repetitively say lies. And we're in real trouble. You've talked about how the media is actually complicit in this. Do you want to explain what you mean by that?
Well, that was kind of back to the whole thing about like creating this false equivalency between what they do. Because if you act like the two political parties are the same when they're clearly not, you intend to minimize the horrible stuff of one party and maximize the bad dealings of the other. And I think that's what happened in 2016 with Hillary Clinton, and the emails thing. I don't think it was good. I think what she did was wrong, and she shouldn't have done it. But clearly it was not on the level of of any of the stuff that Trump's done. It just wasn't. But it got overplayed because for the news media could look like, well, we're objective and we're being fair and we're covering everyone equally. And so it was, again, it was performative by the news media to help the news media look good for the news media rather than to cover the news to help the public understand what was going on. And, as far as that emails thing, Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump are doing the same darn thing.
Of course.
If they got in the White House.
Yeah.
And it was not nearly the big story. It was like a one-day story, and then it just floated on down the river like everything else, because there were plenty of other scandals to talk about. And so you end up with this situation where the news media just get kind of bored with scandal after scandal, and they lower the bar to where they accept like Republican corruption, and it's not news anymore. If they're always corrupt and news is defined as something that doesn't happen all the time, well, then their corruption isn't news.
Well, there's some truth to that, but it's also true that the press is going to have to step up. Are they going to learn from the mistakes they've made in these last few elections and figure out a way to get the facts out in a way that people will understand? And I know when you say the parties aren't the same, of course, everybody knows they aren't the same in terms of policy. I think what you're saying is they aren't the same in terms of morality and truth and
devotion to democracy.
Right.
Most importantly.
Yeah. And
to just
you also
right to
earlier in the episode. Yeah. Earlier in the episode, you also mentioned Jay Rosen, and I think you alluded to part of what he was saying last week on MSNBC, which is that he suggested that news organizations should be covering not the odds of the election, but the stakes of the election.
Right.
I'm wondering if that kind of gets to what you were saying, that, it's stop talking about whether or not, or I guess how likely it is that Donald Trump will win, or how likely it will be that Joe Biden will win, but instead paint that picture for voters about what that reality looks like.
Right. And that's not just a matter. I mean, that should be journalism 101. I mean, that in any story, you want to tell the regular people how it's going to affect them. What does it mean to them? What does it mean to them if Black people aren't allowed to vote, or if they, if you have one drop box in Harris County in Texas, the biggest county in Texas. I mean, what is that going to mean? I mean, and getting to, instead of it being, well, or those Republicans in Texas, they pulled another political victory out of their hat. I mean, if you're covering it like that, just winners and losers, you're going to miss the point that for regular people who work for a living, who like to vote and would like to vote, with a drop box, they're not going to be able to do it because it's going to be an hour and a half drive for them to get to the drop box. So they're not going to vote. And so making those kind of points clear is super important. And but again, that really should be just basic journalism, is making it relevant to regular people. The problem is that, especially in Washington, D.C., too many of the journalists are talking to other journalists and talking to politicians, and they're not talking to regular people. And they're just not thinking very much about how it affects regular people. They're thinking about how it affects their next door neighbor who, might get a consulting contract.
I just did the commencement address at my alma mater, the now called College of Media, but was College of Communications when I was there at the University of Illinois. And this was very much a subject of discussion about what is the role of journalism, what is the role of getting the facts and the truth out. And I think what you're saying is very important to our audience. But Victor gets the last question.
Well, we always like to end the episode with with our guest advice for students, and you've been in journalism for a long time. I mean, given kind of everything that we've been talking about today, and the kind of place that we're in democracy, and kind of how journalism has evolved, what is your advice for graduating seniors from college who may want to go into journalism, and why is that so important, and how can students pursue that in the best way possible right now?
Oh, I love that question because right now journalism is in a mess. It's an economic mess. You have huge amounts of numbers of journalists have been laid off,
Yeah.
and nobody can really find a good business model. And you have these major organizations that become minor organizations. The newspaper where I used to work, the Chicago Tribune, has lost more than half its staff in recent years, and is I mean, frankly, is a shadow of its former self because of that. The people who are still there are good, but but they're not enough of them. So,
Yeah.
but what I tell students is that just because we haven't figured out the business model yet does not mean that people don't want journalism. People do. People want reliable, interesting, informative material, news, coverage more than ever before. It's an information society. People want to know things. It's not like the horse and buggy era where, well, nobody wants a horse and buggy anymore. People want journalism. It's just that the business model is screwed up. And so being able to pay people for it is struggling. But there are some answers, and some nonprofits are stepping up. So I think things are going to get better for the business of journalism as far as people getting jobs. And what I would tell young people, especially, is if that's your passion, go into it. And it's a good for society. It's not you just kind of snooping into what other people are doing. It's you helping people navigate their lives better. It's you helping people protect democracy so that their children and grandkids can still have a free country. And it's a noble profession, and it's worth going into. And if you do go into it, don't go into it with the situation we see so much, which is, oh, I'm just going to kind of write down what everyone says and put that in the newspaper because that way I won't make anyone mad. Make people mad. I mean, there's no point in being a journalist unless you're going to make somebody mad, because if you didn't make anyone mad, I used to tell my reporters this. If we're not making anyone mad today, we're not doing a very good job, because you should be writing about things that some people want to keep secret, that some people don't want the general public to know about, because there's an advantage in having the public ignorant about it. So young journalists, even though they have a lot of experience, they're not like, I was talking about earlier about how Mehdi Hassan or Jon Stewart would be really good at dealing with Trump because they have experience, they're tough old guys who can handle it. But young journalists can be brave too, and you see plenty of brave journalists. And some of the Pulitzer winners in the last week were pretty young and brave journalists who did great work. And so I would just say, don't go into it just for a paycheck. Go into it to be brave and ask hard questions. And make people mad.
That's such great advice. We can't thank you enough. It's a great place to end. And we thank you for spending the time with us. We hope our audience learned as much as we did.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much,
See you
Mark.
around town.
Thank you. Bye-bye. That was a fascinating episode with Mark, and I know we only have a limited time because we're already at 53 minutes, but let's talk about maybe some of the news of the week. There's been some interesting developments from Rudy Giuliani to the Durham report, which really didn't find anything, but Republicans are making a big, big deal out of it. Jill, where do you want to start?
If we just list all the things that happened this last week, it would take more time than we have, but you mentioned two. There's at least a third that we have to mention, which is the debt ceiling. But in terms of the Giuliani indictment, there's a lot of sleazy, disgusting stuff And I know that a lot of people are talking about the sort of prurient interest information, but in there is also that he was going to sell pardons for $2 million and split it with Donald Trump. There's also numerous references to recordings she has of not just Giuliani, but of others as well. There's a whole host of really valuable information in this very terrible lawsuit that she filed for, I think it was 22 different counts, leading to millions and millions of dollars in damages. But what's more important is the thing she's revealing about how our government under Donald Trump worked. So I think that's a pretty important story. Santos's indictment happened this last week. That's an important story. E. Jean Carroll won a resounding victory against Donald Trump. Sort of alluded to it during our conversation with Mark because she got truth out. She got facts out. She was able to communicate information to a jury who listened and acted on it. And that included, as I said during the show, a lot of evidence of his sexually abusive behavior. So what did you think the big stories were?
Well, I mean, when we talk about Rudy Giuliani, it's hard for me to imagine that this man was once America's mayor, as they say, right after 9/11, uniting the country, and how he, and I guess a lot of other people went from pretty, I guess, even if you disagree with them politically, you could respect maybe their service for the country, but they were just kind of fell down this rabbit hole. And now you see Rudy Giuliani, everything that he's done to this one woman. I haven't had a chance to read the full report yet, but just based off of the articles I've read, I mean, it's just like you said, disgusting and just so terrifying. And but I think another thing that is important is looking at what's happening in Florida, because just yesterday, Ron DeSantis signed a bill that would eliminate diversity, equity, inclusion programs from being implemented at public colleges and universities, which is like, I mean, it's just this kind of continued war on things like wokeism and DEI and critical race theory, things that really don't really pose that big of a threat, but that Ron DeSantis is making it seem like it's going to come and attack parents and children when it's really not. I mean, these are just things that should be at colleges. I mean, you think of young people who are more diverse than ever before, and having these programs are just going to help create those safe spaces for young people. And getting rid of these programs, I think, is really dangerous, but a part of this kind of continued attack that I'm worried about, and I think everyone should be worried about. And there's rumors that he might be announcing his presidency soon. So is Mike Pence. So things are, I think, we're in for a ride.
Yeah, it's been an interesting full week, I would say, and next week promises to be equally so. So we'll have to just come back and talk.
Well, maybe we should talk about some lighter. Maybe we should talk about, just in the remaining minutes we have, I mean, summer is quickly approaching. I know many students are graduating or already graduated or on summer break. Do you have any plans for summer?
My plans for summer, I don't get a summer break. So no, it'll be the same old, same old. I am going on.
You're not going to Costa, you're not going to some exuberant island or another country?
No, I don't think so. But I am going with, I'm the Sisters-in-Law podcast is live touring. We were in a fabulous show in Portland, Oregon. And I leave this week for New York and Washington for live shows there with my sisters-in-law. And that's a big deal. And then I get back and I leave with my very close friends, known as the Bridesmaids, because we were all bridesmaids for the bride. And although the marriage didn't last, our friendship has. And so we travel every summer together. And so I'm going to be doing that. And then hopefully maybe just getting to swim and do some stuff other than work. Although I love what I do. And I seem to have lost Victor. Nope, he's back.
No, I'm still here. Sorry. Yes, but I summer should be very exciting. I'll be in DC.
You have a great summer.
Hopefully, well, yeah, I'll be in DC this summer, just like last summer. I'm not quite prepared for the humidity again, but it'll be an exciting summer, and hopefully, we don't get out of school actually until the middle of June. So I still have a month of school, and everyone else is already out of school. So my mindset is summer, but I still have to do school for another month. But
Yeah.
I look forward to the day that summer will be here. But that was a wonderful episode of iGen Politics, and this is perfect timing because I'm in a classroom right now and I'm about to be kicked out. So thank you everyone for watching. Thank you everyone for listening. We will see you all next week for another episode of iGen Politics right here on youtube.com/Politicon. If you don't watch us, you can also find us wherever you follow your podcasts. If you have an iPhone, Apple Podcasts is the place to be. Or if you have an Android, you can also go on Spotify or Google Podcasts. Really, wherever you listen, we are there. And leave us a 5-star review and rating there, as it helps us tremendously. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you next week.